had you read the biography of her, that 3-volume biography?
I
And,
actually
and then,
reviewed volume 2 of that 3-volume biography, and I actually had read and been very fascinated with her for a number of reasons, mainly that my mother had worked for her when I was a child. So she was in my house a real household god. I mean, she even, she showed up in my house when I was a child. I saw her at the television studio where my mother worked. I asked her for a stick of gum. She was fresh out of Juicy Fruit. But I really felt also as a child of the 70s and in the mid 70s during the sort of nostalgia craze, the boom of bicentennial nostalgia, Joseph Lash's Eleanor and Franklin, which had been a big book in my house when I was a kid and I had read, became a mini series. I don't know if you remember, but when we were in college, it was kind of even young people were tuning in once again to the story of Eleanor and Franklin. And that was just so creaky. And Lash had made Eleanor into, in some ways, Franklin's victim. She was kind of a feminist victim of this, deceiving, charismatic, dazzling young man who went on to become, finally overcoming polio, to become president of the United States. And Eleanor is without question an individual in her own right in the Lash story, but she's so much more Franklin's victim. There's also every single generation or every single decade or so does a different Eleanor. And there was pretty soon a very strong, not just feminist Eleanor, but the Eleanor of women's political networks, of women's rights, all those later 70s, early 80s, the feminist studies and also women's studies embraced Eleanor. Then along came toward the end of the 80s and into the 90s, Blanche Wiesen-Cook, a terrific scholar and someone who really understood that Eleanor Roosevelt had a passion, and her passion was part of her life. She was not some school marm, prudish old lady with white hair who smiled a lot and shook her finger at people. She was somebody who had an internal passionate life based on her own sufferings and coming out of her pain from her childhood. And Blanche Wiesen-Cook may have been correct in her assumption. In fact, I believe she was correct in her assumption that Eleanor had, in her search for love, a lifelong search of disappointments, of never feeling she belonged, of being ever the outsider, where love itself was an act of belonging, that she understood that Eleanor's sexuality had involved women, and that she was a woman who found in other women the love and the intimacy that she craved and had never really found with men. And that was a key part of understanding who the politician, who the persevering woman, the persistent organizer, Democratic Party organizer Eleanor became. And so she harmonized Eleanor for the first time. And yet, in the way her books were received, particularly the first volume, some of the older, perfectly open-minded, I would say, and distinguished, but for some reason on this, tightened up, literary guys like John Updike and Jeffrey Ward, a total authority on FDR, wrote about Blanche Wiesen-Cook's Eleanor, saying that essentially she had outed Mrs. Roosevelt. Blanche Wiesen-Cook, herself a radical lesbian feminist scholar, had outed Mrs. Roosevelt. Well, that's not really what Blanche Wiesen-Cook had done. But when I began, the result of all this was that when I began my book, if you Googled, I can't remember what it's called, but it's a Google search where if I write, "Is George Washington?" then the next word is the most asked word in that question, in that sequence on Google. So, is George Washington alive? With Eleanor Roosevelt, it was, is Eleanor Roosevelt gay? That was the question most often asked, presumably by everyone writing a book report and anyone tuning in and wanting to know more about Eleanor. And I thought, what a shame that single question, which technically can't be answered, technically, because there's no technical revelation on her part. All you have, and it's not all at all, but all you have is about 3,000, 5,000 passionate, highly charged, highly eroticized, highly intimate, highly sexual letters of love between herself and, in one sense, one person, Lorena Hickok, because the AP reporter who Eleanor met during her husband's campaign for president, who identified as a lesbian herself, but who to Eleanor was life itself. And she taught Eleanor so many different things about being first lady, about being a woman in the world, about being a reporter, about being a columnist, finally, about all kinds of things that connected Eleanor to the world. She did almost the job that a father does with a child, and Eleanor had lost her father, of course, at age 9. But Lorena Hickok showed Eleanor where she belonged in the world and helped her find that place at this crucial moment of becoming first lady and taking charge in the White House. But the point here is, Eleanor never identified herself on paper in a way that we understand it as gay. On the other hand, how can you understand this relationship without understanding it that way? You can't. It's nonsense, really, to try to see it as so many have tried to put it into the realm of Victorian girls, wrote this way in boarding schools, and this was the sort of effusions. Is just nonsense.